On the last episode of my new devlog series, I had just began work on my new tic-tac-toe roguelike, Nodosis. At first it was a bit difficult, but eventually I managed to make the basic tic-tac-toe board, as well as the scoring for the player. Anyway, since the posting of my video last month, I've added a whole bunch of things. Firstly, I would like to make my game loop, which would be the main menu, to the game, to playing the game, a loading screen, to the shop, and then to the map. I would also like to add resources such as hands, discards, and some form of money for the player to manage, as well as a lost screen or pop-up whenever the player loses. Then, if I have any extra time, I would like to add either rings or unique pieces for each tile variant. So, let's get started, is what I should have done, because I got myself a little distracted, as when I went into Godot began working on the map scene, I decided to make the extra rings instead. The rings in my game are to function in essentially the same way as the Jokers do in Balatro. Each ring will provide a uniquely powerful buff to the player that affects the gameplay in some way. Now, the functionality of these rings is probably going to change sometime in the future for balanced reasons, but hey, just look at those circles go. After making the rings, I got distracted again, and decided that instead of contributing to my game loop, I instead wanted to make the unique pieces. I then made a whole bunch of art for the pieces again, and then only added the functionality to one of them. The time circle tile, which basically just retriggers itself if it retriggers. Oh, and as you can clearly see here, I also added some descriptions to the tiles when the mouse hovers over them. Neat. Yeah, okay, now that I've had enough fun messing around with unimportant stuff, I'm now comfortable with making the map system, so here we go. Essentially what I want my map to be for my game is the same kind of roguelike-y progression system seen in a ton of different games. From what I've heard, this kind of branching paths map system was originally popularized from Slay the Spire, but I don't know. I would also like my map progression system to be a little bit more constricted, as I'd also like my map to be similar to that of Balatro, where you always be forced to face the boss after a couple rounds. Except for my map, I don't want any of these skips or tags or any of that extra stuff. I just want to incorporate the basics for now. For the map choices themselves, I'd like them to vary in difficulty from easy to hard to boss, with the boss being the hardest. And every 3 legs have the player encounter a boss eye, with maybe there being a couple of unique or special battles in between. Anyways, starting on the map, I made a separate scene called Map Scene. Then I wrote a script that generated a long line of data for the map to run on. So much so that it would be practically impossible for the player to play for so long that they end up using up all the map data and end up crashing the game. However, that's still a possibility I have to consider. Next, I wrote a script that spawns the map choices in a diamond pattern, with the map choices having invisible lines connected to them, and depending on the position of the map choice, only certain lines will show up. Oh, and each map decision reads from the data that I wrote, so around like 50% of the choices will become hard battles, and every 4th battle will always be a boss battle. In incorporating all this, the player will also need some kind of score for them to pass through. The score the player is required to achieve depends on the battle type, easy, hard, and boss, as well as a little bit of random variation in between. All of this gets multiplied by the ante number. This ante system works basically the same as the one in Balatro. I don't really know what else to call it besides ante. How it works basically is the ante is the determining factor in how difficult the game gets. Instead of moving the player to a more difficult region to increase the game's difficulty, which is how most games do it, my game will amp up the difficulty depending on the number the ante corresponds to. And like in Balatro, the ante will only ever go up once a boss eye is defeated. Okay, now that we've made the map, now we need some kind of way for our player to get there. And we can't immediately just cause the map to show up. That would be weird and immersion breaking. So either we change the perspective of the player to face the map, or we slap on a loading screen and transition between the 2 scenes by the loading screen. And in my opinion, a good loading screen can be just as useful as a change in perspective. I initially had the idea to have a cool transition with a custom shader and an eye floating in the background, but later I scrapped the idea because it didn't look good. So now the loading screen is just a blank screen, but it does have some chromatic warping to it whenever it transitions, so I guess that is something. Next on my list was the shop. I initially intended to have the shop appear after the map, but I later decided that the player should see the shop first, buy some stuff, then move on to choosing on the map. The shop itself should ideally incorporate some kind of item for the player to buy, which will be tiles as well as rings, then the player should also be able to re-roll the shop and maybe even be able to sell or modify equipment there. So far though, the shop I've made is very bare bones. The player is only capable of buying tile pieces and they don't vary in rarity at all, so what you get is just random. There is also no reroll option yet, nor any option to buy rings or do different stuff. I did however create the shopkeeper eye. As you could probably tell by now, the main characters of the game are just going to be a bunch of floating eyes. Anyways, for now the shop tiles have a cost associated with them, being buyable now with a currency called Hex. You get hexes from beating different rounds of tic-tac-toe, with harder rounds give you more hex. Also, the player should be capable of earning hex later on in development through playing rounds with unique hex generating tiles. Buying a tile adds them to your deck and subtracts their cost from your stockpile. Now, I started getting some horrible gut problems and I got really sick. I was unable to program a whole bunch and I spent most of my time just on my phone. But I did get a couple of smaller things done on my game. From the 12th to the 19th, I added stars that float around in the background, as well as a system for spawning them, which I made modifiable so that I can change what spawns at any point. And I also added some sounds, which are actually really bad, but I thought they sounded good at the time. I also remade the font I had previously made for the game, though I only really changed the uppercase letters. Also, there was this recurring bug that kept happening, which basically mutes any sounds that the tiles play, and for some reason it was because using audio player 2Ds instead of just positionless audio players. I don't know why sometimes the audio player 2Ds glitch out like this, but changing them seemed to fix the problem, I guess. Okay, now that I was feeling better, I worked on getting the rest I had planned done. I put aside a little bit of extra time for myself, about a week's worth, because of the time I had lost while I was sick, and I began work on the main menu to the game. So far, it's very basic. In fact, I can even hardly call it a main menu, but it was good enough. Next, I add the hands and the discards, with only the hands so far being functionable. You can't discard anything yet. And when you run out of hands, the game just stops. There's no death screen yet, so you just sit there. Now, instead of polishing out all the fluff that I had just added and making them at least slightly acceptable, I decided that I could just tackle one more thing. Something that I've been avoiding since the last episode. And these would be the special combos. In order to explain how my specials work, you need to understand how my tic-tac-toe system works. Basically, the player can queue up multiple combinations of 3 in a row in one turn and can play a diagonal, column, row, all at the same time. However, there was one extra combo that I've been wanting to add, and these are combinations that require more than 3 pieces. I've been wanting to add the cube, the circle, the diamond, and the cross. These combos are the most powerful the player can play, but generally are harder to execute. I've been fearing adding them for so long because I struggled when making the detection system for the previously mentioned rows, columns, and diagonals. However, this time I actually had fun making these specials. I found it much easier to detect for these specials this time, as I not only knew what I had to do now, but the specials are inherently sparse, as they take up more space on the board. So, there are fewer instances where the player could be capable of making special moves as compared to standard combos. So, overall, it was not only easy but satisfying to finally incorporate these specials into the game. Okay, now after having added the specials into my game, I got sick again. This time, I caught the cold, not even a week after having my stomach problems. So, for an entire another week, I was having a sore throat and coughing very much. In total, I only spent like half a month adding stuff to my game because of how much I got sick. But oh well. So far, what's the current state of my game? Well, I'm finding it slightly fun to playtest, but not too much, as there's still a lack of important content, and my game, as of now, only has a few bugs, as far as I can tell, and only has performance issues whenever a bunch of tiles are present at once, for some reason. All of this, I'm planning on fixing in the future. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed the video. I've just opened a Discord server for Nodosis like a month ago, so link is in the description for that if you'd like to join. But fair warning, I know hardly anything when it comes to running a Discord server, let alone using Discord. And yeah, I guess that's it for my game so far. See you guys next month maybe? I'm probably gonna post another video sometime around there. Anyways, see ya!